Hi everybody, Tom Esch here in Wausau, Wisconsin. I'm president of Esch Consulting, and this is the Case for Construction Culture podcast, balancing safety with profitability. And I'm with Nick Madson from the Samuels Group.
Yep.
Morning, Nick. Morning, Nick. Great to have you. It's great to be in person. I don't get to do a lot of these in person, and I almost get to do none. An hour from Green Bay where they had the big draft last night.
Yeah, big to do in town.
Big to do. The city doubled in size. Big deal here in Wisconsin. So Nick has quite a strong background in safety. I'm really happy to be here with him today in Wisconsin. He is, as I said, safety director at the Samuels Group, and he's done work with Harley Davidson in safety, the world, and C.R. Meyer, very well-known company here in Wisconsin. And I'm really impressed with Nick's sense of the people part of safety, and that's probably the most exciting thing to me. But I want to start off just asking, what are you excited about, Nick, as you think about your safety world this year here at the Samuels Group?
Sure.
What excites you?
Yeah, so what is certainly the exciting point is part of a very dynamic team here. So we are a construction company working in multiple different verticals. We focus a lot on municipal jail type facilities, which is unique work, something that I have not done in my past. So very exciting projects with a lot of complex situations that we run into in constructing a corrections type facility. So with that, we have a extremely dynamic team here, very varied backgrounds, lots of folks with a lot of construction experience that really lends to some very interesting outcomes on projects that, those challenges get solved in so many ways and things that I've not seen or I've not leveraged before in the past, which is kind of continues for me as a growth thing. And that's what's exciting to me is new challenges each day. We've got a great team here, very strong safety record, and we're certainly going to discuss culture, and I think we have a very strong safety culture here, and that's something that as a safety professional, that's a rewarding experience that you have all that team support and dynamic.
It's great to see, Nick. Not every safety guy I talk with has the excitement that you have, and Samuels really is a great company. I can tell, even though I've only known about you guys a few years. Amazing company here, but every company has its challenges. What are some of the challenges that you guys have had or expect to have this year that will stretch you or stretch the company?
Sure. So we get a lot of the day-to-day challenges just like many other construction contractors, right? Managing subcontractors, working through complex technical issues on site, which those are, I don't mean to say those are the easy things, but the technical and abstract items on a job site, that's something that lots of safety folks and companies deal with. We have processes of working through those. Where we see the challenge is working with multiple subcontractors, different backgrounds. A lot of these projects, being public projects, we don't always get to select our subcontractors. We may have some influence, but we get teams that we work with of all different cultural investment when it comes to safety. There's some companies that we can draw a lot from and learn from, and big players in the game, or even names we haven't heard of that they're a fantastic asset on the project. There's other ones that maybe aren't as far along in their safety cultural building, and in that we need to work on trying to influence them and help them along. We still learn something from everybody on a project, but that being said, we have a very strong safety record and performance that we try to maintain. While we can control a lot of outcomes when we work with our own team, when we're working with others, that's where a lot of times those challenges will present themselves. So part of that same thing that excites me is the same thing that challenges me every day too.
Interesting, and I love your phrase, cultural investment in safety. And culture is a big word, gets thrown around a lot. I use it a lot. I've written a book about it. I'm not always totally sure what I even mean. I mean, it's a slippery concept. It's a huge concept. When you think culture in terms of safety and some of those challenges with your subcontractors or your trade partners. I get it and I've seen it, but what are you thinking about when you think culture? What is it to you, and how does it translate in your work here?
Sure. So my personal feeling is that culture is defined different by everybody, every organization. They certainly, as we sit back and kind of assess them, whether it's company or team or organization wide, we'll look at it, and we may be able to rank where we feel a company lies within our own assessment of that culture. But really, I think what it breaks down to is what's demonstrated in the daily actions. Culture is not one defining thing that, something, for example, well, we did a JSA, we did our job site safety analysis today. We've got a strong culture. Is it something that's ingrained and it's done on every job, no matter how involved the task is or how hazardous we may deem it is? In this industry, one thing that I think we're certainly improving on and getting better at is looking at the historically hazardous work, and we really take finite focus to that, whether it's looking at pick plans for cranes, excavation, confined space. But when we talk about what's really out there eating our lunch when it comes to injuries, it's not always the big hazardous jobs that are getting us. It's material handling, it's cuts to the hands, foreign bodies to the eyes, small things like that. If a culture is not deeply ingrained, a lot of times even strong safety performance, you're focusing on the big things. So to me, culture looks at everything holistically, everything out there that could be a hazard or a threat to a worker or a workplace. And a strong safety culture doesn't let up, no matter how high we place the value on the task that's being done. So in my opinion, it's really, culture is, I can't really define it in a sentence. It's something somebody almost needs to view. And how do you approach everything you do every day, every job, every employee? And certainly that whole team or group of employees makes up that culture. So you're going to have variance within every safety culture at a company that you're going to find anyway.
I really like your language there, and I agree. Culture is so much what we do, and it's so broad and multifaceted, and focusing on the big major. I worked with one organization, and they established the 8 rules to live by. Right, it was the 8 most dangerous things on a job site. But those often aren't the issues happening, especially if your culture is at a certain level, which I know yours is. I also love your passion for not letting up. And you and I have talked about that before, and you just mentioned it. You guys have a great safety record here. You have a very low mod rate here at the Samuels Group, and you're not letting up. And I love that. And it's not always easy to sustain, Nick, right? And it's not always easy to balance with the profitability, and that's the part I wanted to hear your thoughts on. How do you balance that kind of passion? I mean, we say safety first, safety first. I don't know if you've seen the Mike Rowe video where he says safety third.
Yep, absolutely.
It's too important to be first. I'll get complacent if they're hammering it down my throat all day, but yes, safety's first, and the company needs to make money. And if the company's not making money, how do you balance that? Or is that part of your equation day to day, Nick, here to think about that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And a really good point you bring up. Like any other company, you need to be profitable. I mean, that's what happens. How I've viewed this coming up through different contractors that I've worked through. The best example, when I was just starting out my career, I worked for a large electrical contractor. And some of the best advice I was given is safety is absolutely the most important thing. But there's always the but in there, right? And it wasn't the but to exclude anything. Once I thought about this message, I got a little bit more. It was the inclusive but. It was, but remember, we make money by getting pipe on the walls, wire in the pipes, and having the lights on. That's how we make the money. How we stay competitive making that money and how we continue to foster a culture and have employees that want to work here is being able to do it safely.
Yeah.
You have to take safety, profitability, production, they need to balance. It's kind of the pie chart, so to speak, and they all have an equal size, but they all rely on one another. So that being said, multiple places that I've worked, Harley Davidson was big on efficiency studies and looking at finite details of a process and how do we make this process as simple as possible, as productive as possible, and safety was a given. Safety couldn't be sacrificed to gain a second in a process. It couldn't be sacrificed to save a dime. It's something that's got to balance out. And going through a lot of that, you really do find that as you set up tasks, individual tasks for safety, a lot of times productivity is going hand in hand with that, because you get into one of the things that I really stress when it comes to safety, but also for productivity, is some pre-planning. Pre-planning, pre-thought, thinking that process out. When you have a vision in mind of how a task or a project's going to go, there's undoubtedly going to be hiccups. There always are. But if you've planned out and thought through a lot of those things, you know which direction you're going to go, how you're going to change gears a little bit to address it. And if addressing that from the safety end, a lot of times you're looking at it from the productivity end of, okay, this is the most efficient way to do the job. This is the way we're going to do it safely, and we're going to go through with that. When you just strap on the tools and kind of go to the line to call audibles, you can see that. You see contractors or certain employees or workforce that'll approach their day that way, and it's visible in anything. They're the guy or gal that's stressed out all the time because stuff isn't going the way they didn't plan for or plan for, so to speak, and they're always trying to figure out the way they're going to do it. And that's, in my opinion, a lot of times where, all right, then the safety kind of falls off of the thought process because we're not being productive and we're getting stressed out, and it kind of goes down that path. So, certainly, again, we are here to be able to make a living. Everyone goes to work, generally with a thought there to make that living and be able to bring home a paycheck, but bringing home that paycheck, you need to come home with it. You need to be the one coming home and not in a state of injury where you can't enjoy your life. So with that, I kind of go right back to that original message I was taught is, and apply it now. We're here to build a building, design and put together whatever our customers are looking for, but they rely upon us to do it safely. It's just more of an expectation. It's not an afterthought. And that, I think, those companies and cultures that understand that harmonious balance, they really play off each other. And a lot of it just comes from a lot of base components around planning for things to be successful. They're going to be productive. They're going to be safe. And does one come before the other? Going back to Mike Rowe's point, it's a really good talk he kind of has put together there, and I think there's great value. He brings up some really good points. Is it safety first or safety number one? Really, it's those items in balance all the time. That go together, because that's what keeps us going day to day to the next project and job and so forth.
Good stuff. You mentioned the electrical group you were with, and you mentioned Harley Davidson. Maybe that's some of your training ground, but I'm curious, what other kinds of training, like so many safety professionals, as our listeners know, get into safety because you came up through the trades, you came up on site, tons of experience, you know the tools, you know the dangers. We haven't necessarily trained. You might be a CSP, you might have gone to school, but training and influencing culture, training and having an impact, especially when you're not in control of those subcontractors, right? And they don't necessarily share the Samuels Group values at the depth you do, or have the discipline you've had. I'm curious what other kinds of training you've had, Nick, or what you think about in terms of training to influence culture, not just to tell the guy how to do it safely, but to really shape a culture that really I think is the driver behind so much great safety.
Sure. So formalized, kind of looking at training or resources that I've had in the past looking at this, I kind of look at three major points if I were to break it out over my career. So, I did go to formalized schooling for construction health and safety. And when I was going through that, behavior-based safety was kind of a buzzword or topic.
Yeah.
So we touched on that. And at the time, it didn't make a whole heck of a lot of sense to me because I really didn't have the time in the field to understand how that was all applied. But getting some of that discussion and thinking around why folks do what they do, why decisions are made, and working through that. I would say the most beneficial training I've had has been training of life and training on the job. I've had multiple mentors, coworkers that have really helped you to understand how you're going to influence somebody's thoughts. You need to first understand what motivates them. Why are they here? Are they here for the paycheck? Are they here because they truly love the work they're doing? You need to take whatever you're trying to sell, whether that's cultural improvement, whether that's right down to simple task improvement, and how does that work for them? How is that going to work into their day, make their day better? Are you able to look at a safety process, that'll help drive overall cultural improvement, and let somebody apply that to their daily work and find that it makes their work easier? It makes their work more desirable to do because maybe they're not in such a hazardous arrangement. You got to figure out what drives them and how what you're trying to sell works for them. The third bit, I did have some time working in the field and quickly learned when things got flipped on their back. I started falling into some of the same feedback that I had received years prior in the safety role. I would look at some of these things and policies or procedures that I had worked on in a safety role. Now I'm in the field and I'm like, man, these really don't make sense from this view. I mean, now that the tool is in your hand and you're trying to follow this procedure to do the work, safely because somebody told you how to do it. A lot of that drove the process that I now really try to take forward. And if I'm gonna try to develop a process, a procedure, something that we're gonna change that's gonna affect somebody at that field level, first person I'm gonna start with is that person that it's gonna end up affecting, the end user, that field or that craft worker. Here within the Samuels Group, we've got carpenters and laborers that we're signatory to, and all of our self-perform work with that group. Nobody knows how to do the task better than that craft worker, and that's who you need to go out there, get an understanding from. If we're gonna, take a simple task and try to make a safety change to it, how's it gonna affect this guy? We're gonna make a PPE change or a process or a tooling change. Rather than just say, this is what you're going to use, this is what you're going to do it. I can tell you that doesn't influence their decision making or their cultural investment in a good way. When you go to them and say, all right, this is kind of what I'm trying to get to. Here's some thoughts I had. What are your thoughts? Sometimes the feedback is big thumbs down. All right, I can take that. That's okay.
Yeah.
Back to the drawing board. All right, here are the other options. And when they're able to have involvement and some feeling in that decision making, they know that they're part of a culture that values their opinion. I mean, really, when we look at our safety culture here, it's top down. It's all around. It is that harmonious balance, right? But when we look at construction safety, where is the big exposure? It's at our craft worker level. It's not at necessarily my level or another manager's or supervisor's level. Sure, there's risk when we're on that job site as we don't see things the way that those others do that spend every waking moment there. But finding out how to get that person to feel that their opinion and their contribution is being valued, I think that's the biggest thing that leads to influencing some decision making. Because then when they leave that conversation or that interaction, there's a feeling of, of self-worth and confidence that's worth everything, and it really helps to build that overall culture and contribute to it.
Mm-hmm. Wow, that's an amazing answer. It's multifaceted. You've had infield experience, you've had formal training, you understand human psychology. I hear a really good understanding of people, and I think we ask a lot of our safety leaders, Nick, and I think you're a good example of one who, you have the infield experience, you have the formal training, and I think you really understand people, and it's not the 1950s anymore. You can't show up and just direct a guy, and I'm not sure it worked very well in the 50s or the 80s or whenever, but we're in a new world,
right,
where it's highly collaborative, and we expect our safety people to be good on the tools, seasoned in the field, and understand psychology. How do people work, and how do different individuals work?
Yep.
You're going to have a variety of individuals, and then a variety of different cultures, because you guys do mostly management, and so you have all these trade partners that have all these different ways of approaching work, and that's a steep hill to climb, Nick. But the impression is that you're doing well at it, and that you do have good training, and you do have a background in it, and it's also influencing the organization you're in at times. Though it seems like your style and your interests in safety are a really good match with the culture here, and with the leader who said starts from the top down. Right? It's even more complex if you're in an organization and your role, and you don't have that strong leadership from the top.
Absolutely.
That is doubly challenging. And I do work with safety guys like that.
Yep.
I'm sure you've seen some of that.
Absolutely, and if you don't have that commitment, you have a tough task in front of you.
Tough.
If you're going to be the only the cheerleader, the organizer, the everything, it's a tough task, and there are folks that are in that situation. I've had years of my career where I'm in those situations. Fortunately, not at all where I'm at now, which is part of the exciting point. But
yes.
What I can say to that for anybody that is dealing with that, don't give up. Things do improve. Continue to try and influence change. Maybe you'll start influencing change at that higher level. You're gonna have failures in this game and career of communicating and trying to influence people and that cultural building. But don't let those sideline you. They're a hiccup. You move past them. You go back to, all right, we're gonna attempt to go better. There are gonna be folks in the office, in the field, that you are going to have failed communications with. It's just not going to happen immediately.
Yeah.
But over time, you may find that you'll build some of the strongest relationships with those folks that maybe started out with a little bit of headbutting, and you'll find you learn a lot from those people too, because they're probably butting heads with you because they have a very strong feeling on culture and opinion and how the job should be done. So take note to that, and try not to take it as a negative. Take that as a very good opportunity to learn and build a very strong relationship.
Don't take it too personal when you get the thumbs down.
That's right.
That takes
right.
a lot of self-confidence and emotional intelligence, I think. Hey, maybe a final question here, Nick, for you, and to think about creating successful change within a culture, a small thing or a medium-sized thing. Do you have any story where you've been part of a change that either went well and did really influence behavior or outcomes, or more interestingly to me even, is one that failed?
Sure.
It didn't go well. You tried, you did something. Do you have any story like that you can tell?
Absolutely, and I can tell you that there's probably just as many weighted in the failure side as there are on the successful side.
Very common, yes.
I'll pull one here, and it starts out. It's more of a technical issue that we were dealing with, related to injuries. So working for a very large construction contractor across the nation, thousands of trade people employed, and we were reviewing our previous year's claims and what was eating our lunch, so to speak, what was getting us, and our injury trends were weighted toward foreign bodies in the eye. We did a lot of metal fabrication.
Wow.
Had a lot of trades, a lot of grinding, cutting, welding, those sort of things. We had carpentry as well. we were signatory to every trade except for electricians at the time. So
Wow.
huge exposure all across the country, different cultural areas, different involvement, a lot of good, strong leaders. However, we were looking at 27 recordable cases through the year, all related to foreign bodies in the eye.
Wow.
As any safety person knows, when somebody gets something in their eye and they're headed to the eye clinic, we all kind of do the cringe because we know what's going to happen. I mean, really, your eyes are a very sensitive organ.
Yeah.
Anything gets in there, an eye doctor is likely going to give a prescription for an antibiotic because they don't want that dirt, that rust contaminant or anything else in that eye to cause an infection. I can't argue with their preventive methods. It's you know, your eyes are so valuable. Even if they get that item out, you don't want to risk an infection. So we sat and discussed as a group of safety professionals. We had about 15 folks in the room. How are we going to fix this? You know, well, we can't change the tasks that we are doing. These are necessary manual tasks on the jobs. So let's look at, all right, in our fabrication shops, we can control a few things, you know, with guarding, that sort of thing. But what it came down to, looking at our field staff, is we started reviewing PPE. All right, what can we do? We found these magnets that went on the brim of a hard hat that as you would raise a grinding shield or a welding hood, any loose stuff would sometimes catch. All right, cool. We're knocking some things out here. We're working through that hierarchy of controls, right? Nobody really cares that you put a magnet on the brim of their hard hat. They don't know the difference. Well, we weren't getting the results we were hoping for, and we moved into a sealed eyewear program. And mandatory sealed eyewear basically overnight.
Wow.
Big change to that craft worker's day to day. I mean, realize you switch out someone's glasses, hard hat, welding hood, gloves, boots. That's tied to them on a daily basis. That affects their world. It shakes it right to the core. So when we went to that sealed eyewear, we're like, we might have found the magic bullet here. We're going to seal these off. You know, we had a lot of the foam line, the spoggles, or whatever you want to call. And we tried thousands of dollars worth of these things, and when we thought we found the best option, you know, we were buying almost $15 a pair safety glasses, which anybody familiar with the industry knows that's a lot, especially when you're talking thousands of craft workers.
A lot.
So we're going to make that change. Well, all of a sudden, you're dealing with eyewear fogging, people tripping over things that they don't see due to moisture buildup. And we start looking at all these, and not that we all of a sudden had a huge claims dollars change, but what we had created was almost a greater hazard than the solution we were trying to provide. And we kind of had to reel back, and a whole room full of very seasoned, very, very good safety professionals in that room. We kind of failed here. We failed the group. Not only culturally, we had a very strong safety culture, very good safety record, fantastic OSHA VPP company, great programs, great everything in place. But we kind of forgot or moved past that. Let's go talk to this worker and understand how this is going to affect his day, how that's going to make this change. And you know, overall, it was a failed attempt. The company ended up removing the requirements. Certainly, still looked at other alternatives. You know, and ended up really making a little bit of change on our care and claims handling end. With, instead of flushing out, you know, somebody's eye on a job site, we immediately proactively took them to an eye doctor. You know, we worked with the eye doctors at the clinics near our big project sites to say, this is what we're trying to fight. A lot of them maybe didn't understand that by prescribing something that immediately really affects a company and how they have to handle an injury. You know, once we gave that explanation and they kind of felt, all right, these folks do care about their employees. You know, they're also trying to manage through a system and control their costs so they can remain competitive. All right, that works. You know, so then we were getting, you know, we're gonna remove the foreign body and maybe do a sample eye drop that's not a prescription type of thing to make sure it clears up. You know, certainly there were cases where it wouldn't, and then we would move into antibiotics and back onto that recordable. All right, that's a mark on the page, and while it's extremely important for every business to watch that, a mark on the page is less important than taking care of an employee and making sure that employee can, you know, continue to go home and not have issues with their vision or potential, loss of an eye or something that's really going to prevent them from living a full and happy life the way they came to you that day for work. So yeah, looking back at that kind of goes back to some of the things we were previously talking about. You really got to, if you're going to look to influence or make a change, how far out do the ripples go? And we really got to get to the end of it and work our way back a little bit. Not everything works out as well in the real world as it did on paper. We all know that in this industry. We see it every day. So that would be kind of a failed attempt, that led to some course correction on down the road. But that one really came down to was, again, getting back to the people that you're trying to help and support, and you got to really involve them. And that's certainly changed and helped to change the way that I address items that are going to have effect on our workers and employees.
Boy, that's a really interesting story. It's really complex, isn't it? All those bright safety minds, and yet the thing you thought was the clear, obvious solution was not. By the way, I don't know eye care that well. When you have an antibiotic in the eye, then the guy can't work for some days because he can't see, or what's the downside to the antibiotic?
So the antibiotic makes it an OSHA recordable because it's a prescription.
Oh, it's an OSHA recordable.
So that's what we were fighting, was our recordable log.
Got it.
Fighting the numbers on paper, not necessarily the issue that was out there. There's certainly cases where people will get a foreign body removed, and some eye doctors will write them off of work for 3 days. Well, then, looking at record keeping, you've now just gone to a lost time type of injury.
Sure.
Certainly, if it's a case where somebody has that sort of threat to their vision or injury to the eye, you got to do what you got to do to take care of that employee. And if that means you're going to have a lost time case, then that's the pill you swallow.
Yes.
And that's what happened. Now, how do we prevent that moving forward? And some of that is working with a healthcare professional and sometimes having to educate them a little bit on OSHA recordability. Their priority is take care of that patient that came in.
Sure.
So you both really have the same goal,
yes.
but you need to sometimes have some discussion and open communication as to how those outcomes influence each other.
Boy, that's an interesting, complex story. Thank you for sharing it, Nick. Any final thoughts you have on safety or the year or what you're doing here?
I think I touched on a few points throughout this, and certainly I gain a lot. I listen to this podcast as well and appreciate hearing from the broad experience that you pull from guests. But the biggest thing, culture is it's definitely not built overnight, and I'm not the first one to say that, nor will I be the last. It is such small incremental steps that have to happen. I'm extremely fortunate that I was able to join a company that was, already such a firm foundation and really was propelling that ship forward, and I was able to jump on, and now that I'm able to help support that group is certainly a very rewarding thing. And there are days, there's weeks, there's months, there's years where it doesn't feel like you make any progress, but it's a lifelong step, or a lifelong stepping process that you're going to get through, going cultural to cultural. And even if one day we're not able to necessarily move forward or impact ourselves, maybe we're able to impact a customer or a subcontractor that's also struggling to make that journey. So realize that these efforts, they don't go unnoticed, and they're not unfounded any single day. So you got to keep with it every day. You got to keep consistent. And another thing you touched on is positivity. You got to have a handful of that. And that's something that I've learned over the years and had to alter my approach a lot. And it goes a lot farther. So just got to remember why we're out here. So we're here to certainly support our employees and our workers, and they do some amazing things. We build some amazing buildings, things that as you see when they're done, it's fantastic, and you have a role in that. A very strong supporting role, and that's something certainly here we have as well, and something we're proud to share.
Nice. If people want to find you, where should they look? So you can find me LinkedIn. You can also find my
contact information through our company's website, samuelsgroup.net. If anybody ever has any questions or wants to have any discussion, certainly open to that. Just as you and I have had discussion on multiple topics, and always open to networking and trying to help somebody out, because odds are, as selfish as it sounds, I'm likely going to gain something as well out of that conversation and that interaction. So, yeah.
Well, thanks for your time. Nick Madson, the Samuels Group, signing off right here, close to Green Bay. We wish the Green Bay Packers luck this fall in their culture, even though I'm a Viking fan. Wish them the best, and good to be with you, Nick.
Yep, thanks, Tom.
All right.